He thought motivation was the answer. He believed that if he just watched the right video, read the right quote, or heard the right speech, something inside him would ignite. That he'd feel ready. That he'd finally begin. So he consumed, endlessly, motivational reels, hustle edits, success montages. He felt the rush, the dopamine, the temporary fire. But then, nothing. No action. No change. Just another scroll. Another delay. Another excuse. And slowly, he began to realize, motivation is not the beginning. It's the illusion. It's the sugar rush before the crash. The spark without the flame. The hype without the habit. He remembered a quote, "Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going." But he never got going, because he mistook inspiration for transformation. He thought feeling something was the same as becoming something. But feelings fade, and fading became his pattern. He'd feel inspired at midnight, but sleep through the morning. He'd plan his goals on Sunday, but break them by Tuesday. He'd talk about change, but never live it. And the worst part? He blamed himself. He thought he was lazy, weak, broken. But he wasn't. He was just misled. Sold the lie that motivation is enough. That feeling ready is the prerequisite for action. But it's not. Action is the prerequisite for change. And change begins not when you feel like it, but when you act despite not feeling like it. He began to study the patterns. The way he consumed motivation like entertainment. The way he used inspiration as a substitute for discipline. The way he waited for the perfect mood, the perfect energy, the perfect moment. But perfection never came. And waiting became his prison. He realized that motivation is a mood, and moods are unreliable. Discipline is a decision, and decisions build destiny. So he stopped chasing the feeling. He started building the ritual. Wake early. Move the body. Write the truth. No scroll. No hype. No escape. Just effort. Just silence. Just structure. And it was hard. Brutal. Boring. But it was real. And real, he learned, is better than exciting. Because excitement fades, but structure stays. He began to feel proud, not of results, but of consistency. He began to feel strong, not from hype, but from habit. He began to feel free, not from escape, but from alignment. And alignment, he learned, is the opposite of addiction. He was no longer addicted to motivation. He was devoted to discipline. He no longer needed to feel ready. He simply needed to begin. He no longer needed to be inspired. He simply needed to return. And return he did. Daily. Quietly. Relentlessly. Because discipline is not a mood. It's a method. A method of becoming. A method of remembering. A method of rewiring. He rewired his mornings. No phone. No scroll. Just breath. Just movement. Just truth. He rewired his evenings. No stimulation. No distraction. Just reflection. Just gratitude. Just silence. And in that silence, he found strength. Not the strength to perform, but the strength to persist. Not the strength to impress, but the strength to endure. Not the strength to escape, but the strength to stay. He remembered the times he waited to feel ready. The times he postponed action for inspiration. The times he delayed his life for a spark. And he smiled, not with shame, but with compassion. Because healing doesn't come from hype, it comes from habit. And habit is built in silence, in repetition, in structure. So ask yourself, what are you waiting for? The perfect mood, the perfect energy, the perfect moment? It won't come, but you can. You can come back to breath, back to body, back to being. You don't need motivation. You need movement. You don't need hype. You need habit. You don't need to feel ready. You need to begin. Begin now. Begin small. Begin again. Because the illusion of inspiration is seductive, but the truth of discipline is liberating. And liberation begins with action. He didn't realize he was addicted, not to substances, not to screens, but to a feeling. The feeling of being ready, the feeling of being inspired, the feeling of being in the perfect state to begin. And that addiction was invisible. It didn't scream, it whispered. It whispered, "Not today. You're not in the mood. Wait until it feels right." And he listened, again and again. He waited for clarity, for confidence, for certainty. But none of it came, because readiness is not a gift, it's a myth. A myth sold by highlight reels and hustle culture. A myth that says you must feel powerful before you act. But action, he learned, is what creates power. He began to notice the pattern. He'd set goals, big ones, bold ones. But then he'd wait for motivation, wait for energy, wait for the perfect moment. And waiting became his habit, his comfort, his identity. He said, "I'm not ready." But what he meant was, "I'm afraid. Afraid to begin. Afraid to fail. Afraid to feel uncomfortable." And fear, he realized, wears many masks. It wears the mask of procrastination, the mask of perfectionism, the mask of readiness. But beneath every mask is the same truth: avoidance. He was avoiding the discomfort of growth, the awkwardness of starting, the silence of effort. And effort, he learned, is not glamorous, it's gritty. It's waking up tired and showing up anyway. It's feeling doubt and acting anyway. It's hearing fear and moving anyway. He remembered a quote: "You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." And his system was built on waiting, on hesitation, on delay. So he changed it, not by force but by awareness. He stopped asking, "Do I feel ready?" He started asking, "What's the next step?" And the next step was always simple. Not easy, but simple. Wake up, move, breathe, begin. No scroll, no hype, no escape. Just action, just structure, just truth. And truth, he learned, is not a feeling, it's a practice. He practiced showing up, practiced beginning, practiced returning. And return he did. Daily, quietly, relentlessly. Because discipline is not about readiness, it's about rhythm. A rhythm of effort, a rhythm of alignment, a rhythm of becoming. He no longer waited for the mood. He created the moment. He no longer chased the spark. He built the fire. He no longer escaped discomfort. He honored it. Because discomfort, he realized, is the birthplace of growth. He began to track his days. Not for productivity, but for honesty. He wrote down his rituals, his distractions, his escapes. And the data didn't lie. He was not lazy. He was addicted to feeling ready. And addiction, he learned, is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's logical. Sometimes it sounds like self-care. But real self-care is not postponing effort. It's honoring it. He honored his mornings. No phone, no scroll, just breath, just movement, just truth. He honored his evenings. No stimulation, no distraction, just reflection, just gratitude, just silence. And in that silence, he found strength. Not the strength to perform, but the strength to persist. Not the strength to impress, but the strength to endure. Not the strength to escape, but the strength to stay. He remembered the times he waited to feel ready. The times he postponed action for inspiration. The times he delayed his life for a spark. And he smiled, not with shame, but with compassion. Because healing doesn't come from hype, it comes from habit. And habit is built in silence, in repetition, in structure. So ask yourself, what are you waiting for? The perfect mood, the perfect energy, the perfect moment? It won't come, but you can. You can come back to breath, back to body, back to being. You don't need motivation. You need movement. You don't need hype. You need habit. You don't need to feel ready. You need to begin. Begin now. Begin small. Begin again. Because the addiction to feeling ready is seductive, but the truth of discipline is liberating. And liberation begins with action. He didn't realize his biggest obstacle wasn't laziness. It was identity. Not who he was, but who he believed he was. He said, "I'm not disciplined. I'm not consistent. I've never been that kind of person." And every time he said it, he made it true. Not because it was fact, but because it was repeated. And repetition, he learned, is how identity is built. Not through genetics, not through personality, but through story, through belief, through language. He had built a cage with his own words. A cage that said, "I'm not a morning person. I can't focus. I always quit." And the cage felt real. But it wasn't. It was imagined, reinforced by years of patterns, years of avoidance, years of escape. He began to study the stories he told himself. The subtle ones. The quiet ones. The ones that shaped his choices without him noticing. He realized that identity is not fixed. It's fluid. It's not inherited. It's constructed. And construction happens daily. Through action. Through ritual. Through repetition. He remembered a quote, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." And he had been voting for weakness. For avoidance. For stagnation. Not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know he could vote differently. He thought identity was a diagnosis. But it's a decision. A daily decision. A quiet decision. A powerful decision. So he began to rewrite the story. Not with affirmations, but with action. He stopped saying, "I'm not disciplined." He started acting disciplined. He stopped saying, "I'm not consistent." He started showing up. He stopped saying, "I always quit." He started returning. And return he did. Daily. Quietly. Relentlessly. Because identity is not declared. It's demonstrated. He demonstrated discipline. Not through intensity, but through integrity. He demonstrated consistency. Not through perfection, but through persistence. He demonstrated strength. Not through performance, but through presence. And presence, he learned, is the foundation of identity. He began to ask better questions. Not, "What do I feel like doing?" but "Who am I becoming?" Not, "What's the easiest path?" but "What's the aligned path?" Not, "What's my personality?" but "What's my practice?" Because personality is a story, but practice is a system. And systems shape souls. He built a system. Wake early. Move the body. Write the truth. No scroll. No escape. Just effort. Just silence. Just structure. And the structure began to shape him. Not into someone new, but into someone true. The true self beneath the noise. Beneath the doubt. Beneath the story. He no longer needed to feel like a disciplined person. He simply needed to act like one. And action, he learned, is the fastest way to rewrite identity. He remembered the times he said, "I'm not that kind of person." And he smiled, not with shame, but with compassion. Because every person is that kind of person, if they choose to be, if they act like it, if they return to it. So he returned. Again and again. Especially when it was hard. Especially when it was boring. Especially when it was silent. Because silence is where identity is rebuilt. Not through hype. Not through performance. But through presence. Through breath. Through being. He began to feel different. Not because he changed overnight, but because he changed daily. He voted for strength. He voted for clarity. He voted for discipline. And the votes added up. Slowly. Quietly. Powerfully. Until one day, he looked in the mirror and saw someone new. Not someone perfect. Not someone finished. But someone aligned. Someone consistent. Someone free. And freedom, he learned, is not found in escape. It's found in embodiment. Embodying the truth. Embodying the practice. Embodying the self. So ask yourself, what story are you telling? What identity are you reinforcing? What votes are you casting with your actions? You don't need to feel like a disciplined person. You need to act like one. You don't need to wait for a new personality. You need to build a new practice. You don't need to escape who you are. You need to return to who you could be. Because the identity trap is seductive, but the truth of embodiment is liberating. And liberation begins with action. He didn't change when he felt ready. He changed when he acted anyway. After years of waiting, years of planning, years of postponing, something inside him snapped. Not in anger, not in desperation, but in clarity. He realized that the perfect moment was never coming. That readiness was a mirage. That motivation was a mood. And moods are unreliable. So he stopped waiting. He started moving. Not because he felt powerful, but because he was tired of being stuck. And stuck, he learned, is not a place. It's a pattern. A pattern of hesitation. A pattern of delay. A pattern of overthinking. He had overthought his life into paralysis. He had planned his dreams into oblivion. He had waited for certainty until uncertainty became his identity. And identity, he realized, is shaped by action. Not by intention. Not by emotion. But by movement. So he moved. Slowly. Quietly. Relentlessly. He woke up early. Not because it felt good, but because it felt necessary. He trained his body. Not for aesthetics, but for integrity. He wrote his thoughts. Not for performance, but for presence. And presence, he learned, is the antidote to procrastination. Because procrastination is not laziness, it's fear. Fear of discomfort. Fear of failure. Fear of silence. But silence, he discovered, is sacred. It's where truth lives. It's where clarity breathes. It's where action begins. He began to build momentum. Not through intensity, but through consistency. He showed up daily, even when tired, even when uninspired, even when uncertain. And uncertainty, he learned, is not a reason to stop. It's a reason to begin. Because action creates clarity. Action creates confidence. Action creates identity. He remembered a quote, "You don't need to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step." And the first step was always simple. Not easy, but simple. Wake, move, breathe, begin. No scroll, no escape, no delay. Just effort, just structure, just truth. And truth, he learned, is not found in thought. It's found in action. He stopped asking, "What should I do?" He started asking, "What can I do now?" And now became his mantra. Now became his power. Now became his freedom. He no longer waited for inspiration. He became the source. He no longer waited for permission. He gave it to himself. He no longer waited for change. He embodied it. And embodiment, he learned, is the highest form of wisdom. Not knowing, not saying, but doing. He did the work. Quietly, daily, relentlessly. And the work began to change him. Not instantly, not dramatically, but deeply. He felt stronger. Not because life got easier, but because he got braver. He felt clearer. Not because the noise stopped, but because he stopped chasing it. He felt freer. Not because he escaped, but because he returned. Returned to breath. Returned to body. Returned to being. And being, he learned, is not passive, it's powerful. He began to trust himself. Not because he was perfect, but because he was consistent. He began to respect himself. Not because he achieved, but because he endured. He began to love himself. Not because he performed, but because he persisted. And persistence, he learned, is sacred. It's the quiet fire that builds character. The invisible force that rewires the soul. He faced setbacks, missed days, slipped routines. But he didn't quit. He didn't spiral. He didn't escape. He returned. And return, he realized, is the essence of discipline. Not perfection. Not intensity. But return. Again and again. Especially when it's hard. Especially when it's boring. Especially when it's silent. Because silence is where strength is built. So ask yourself, what are you waiting for? The perfect plan. The perfect mood. The perfect moment? It won't come. But you can. You can come back to breath. Back to body. Back to being. You don't need motivation. You need movement. You don't need hype. You need habit. You don't need to feel ready. You need to begin. Begin now. Begin small. Begin again. Because the shift to action is not dramatic. It's deliberate. And deliberation becomes destiny. He didn't become someone new by waiting. He became someone new by returning. Not once. Not loudly. But daily. Quietly. Relentlessly. And in that return, something shifted. Not his circumstances. Not his environment. But his identity. The story he told himself began to change. He no longer said, "I'm not disciplined." He said, "I show up." He no longer said, "I always quit." He said, "I return." He no longer said, "I'm not ready." He said, "I begin." And beginning, he learned, is sacred. It's the moment you choose truth over comfort, action over avoidance, alignment over escape. He began to feel different, not because life got easier, but because he got clearer. He no longer needed motivation. He had momentum. He no longer needed hype. He had habit. He no longer needed escape. He had embodiment. And embodiment, he learned, is the highest form of healing. He embodied discipline, not as punishment, but as practice. He embodied silence, not as emptiness, but as clarity. He embodied effort, not as struggle, but as strength. And strength, he learned, is not loud, it's consistent. He became consistent, not perfect, not robotic, but present. Present with his breath, present with his rituals, present with his truth. And truth, he learned, is not found in thought, it's found in action. He acted, daily, quietly, relentlessly, and the actions rewired his soul. He no longer chased identity, he built it, brick by brick, breath by breath, ritual by ritual. He built a new self, not from scratch, but from silence, from structure, from return. He returned to mornings. No phone, no scroll, just breath, just movement, just truth. He returned to evenings. No stimulation, no distraction, just reflection, just gratitude, just silence. And in that silence, he found strength. Not the strength to perform, but the strength to persist. Not the strength to impress, but the strength to endure. Not the strength to escape, but the strength to stay. He stayed, with the breath, with the body, with the being. And being, he learned, is not passive, it's powerful. He became powerful, not through dominance, but through discipline. Not through control, but through clarity. Not through noise, but through presence. And presence, he learned, is the foundation of freedom. He became free. Free from the lie of motivation. Free from the addiction to readiness. Free from the trap of identity. He became someone new. Not because he changed overnight, but because he changed daily. He voted for strength. He voted for clarity. He voted for discipline. And the votes added up. Slowly, quietly, powerfully. Until one day, he looked in the mirror and saw someone he respected. Someone he trusted. Someone he loved. Not because he was perfect, but because he was aligned. And alignment, he learned, is the highest form of success. So ask yourself, who are you becoming? What are you voting for with your actions? What story are you reinforcing with your rituals? You don't need to feel ready. You need to begin. You don't need to be perfect. You need to return. You don't need to escape who you are. You need to embody who you could be. Because the rise of the new self is not dramatic. It's deliberate. And deliberation becomes destiny.